So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for what is a discussion on an important topic in publishing right now and will be in the future. Sustainability or climate change or environmental issues has been identified as one of the top 5 concerns that publishers have by the International Publishers Association and their Inspire programme. And indeed, it's a topic that's not only discussed within publishing houses, but across the whole supply chain. So how do we become a more sustainable publishing industry? How do we become more environmentally friendly? And how do we contribute towards the climate change goals that we know are coming ever closer towards us? So I'm joined today by 3 panelists. So to my left here, we have Simone Desjocas, who has more than 30 years of experience in education and publishing and leads the publishing company Les Éditions Les Quatre Cinq Coups, which he became owner of in February 2013, as well as the roles of president of the Quebec Édition Committee that he has occupied since 2016. He's been a teacher, consultant, publisher, and distributor. So we're in safe hands with you, Simone. We then have Diego Radici, who is the book sales director for Elcograph SPA, an Italian leader in the printing sector where he's worked since 2014. And finally, we have Ashley Gordon, who is the global publishing market manager for HP's page-wide industrial division. Ashley has over 20 years experience supporting publishers and industry providers to implement new technology strategies. So we're going to go straight into the questions for you, Simone, and hear it from the publisher's perspective. And we've had this conversation many times, and I know that as a publisher that you, like many others, are taking environmental and sustainability issues very seriously. So what areas of the process are you looking at to improve when it comes to production and distribution in order to contribute to our climate change goals?
I love it. Thank you for the introduction.
Yes.
Thank you, Emma. I think there's a few elements in your conversation. Sustainability is something that matters through the whole book chain, and you mentioned it, and I totally agree. And I have to say that above and beyond me as a publisher, our whole industry in Quebec has been working on sustainability. We recently created a committee in our Book Publishers Association to talk about strategies to reduce waste, to increase productivity. And we're all in business to make great books, but we're also there to make sure that we don't lose our shirt. So we are also thinking about finance and budgets, and that makes sense. So in terms of my personal company, we've looked at every sector of the chain, reducing the number of file cabinets and paper printing. And I don't know if you are like me, but I mean, I have stacks and stacks of papers, royalty reports and contracts and all of that. Are you okay? This is getting better and better.
The chair, bro.
No, see, something happened.
Okay, just the chair, not the person.
Better the chair than the legs.
We're good? We're good? All right. Sustainability is also about making good chairs, I think. So yeah, so we're looking at reducing paper within the company. We're talking about reducing also the amount of time we take within the projects. But one of the key things that we've been looking at, and I'm sure my guests to the left will be happy to hear this, we've been looking at strategies where many publishers from our province, children's publishers, and if you are a children's publisher, like most of you are, I'm sure, you know that printing children's book, 4-color, 32 pages, is darn expensive, and the print run is really low. So it makes it even more expensive, and it's hard to get that margin. Well, we collectively print together. there's 8 to 9 publishers who collectively print everything together. And so that brings the 3,000 units to 50,000 units. So our printer is very happy because he can order the paper, he can get it cheaper because he knows he's printing 50,000, 100,000 units, and it's set in time because we're all structured that way. Now it requires a sense of trust between publishers, a sense that the fact that I'm making good books has nothing to do with selling them. I'm not afraid that my competitor will see my books, because eventually he'll see them anyways in the bookstores, right? That's called marketing and sales. It's got nothing to do with printing. So we work on that, and I think that's a really important part of what we've been doing, and it's actually reduced costs from 30 to 40%. And smaller publishers, I'm a relatively big publisher in Quebec. I print 3,000 to 4,000 units, and me being in that group helps publishers who only do 1,000 units, and they're really happy because of me and them together, we have a bigger run.
So collaboration has been an important way of working together. But as a Quebecois publisher, you also sell your books outside of Canada, and you're selling them in places like France and Belgium and Switzerland, where French is spoken. So they go on a long journey.
They do, and I think anybody who's printed and asked to be put on a ship knows that the prices have gone shooting up, and sometimes you're told, well, sorry, we have no containers, you'll have to wait a month, and it gets really challenging. And I can perhaps put in there the parenthesis of multinationals that control these things sometimes make it difficult for small independent people like us, and we need to stick together. So in terms of shipping, we've tried to find ways of reducing that. We used to print quite a bit in China. We do less. We do more within Quebec. Because of this deal, there are some things we can't print in Quebec. For example, board books, only in China right now, very large books. So we're trying to reduce our print, but we're also looking at opportunities of perhaps printing half of our stock in Europe. So that means that the time frame as well would be allowed. Well, that's good for a publisher like me who's growing in size, but not necessarily good for everybody. But again, if I can find a printer maybe in Europe who's willing to do the same thing as my printer in Canada, maybe. And if I can find publishers in Europe who are willing to do that and don't risk the fear of being, then we can collectively reduce the cost, increase productivity for the printer, which is good for the environment as well. Less waste.
So what's been your motivation for this? You've talked about cost a lot and, recent geopolitical issues that have driven up, and obviously the pandemic as well that's driven up the length of time for shipping and the cost of shipping. But are there other motivations behind seeking these efficiencies?
I think all of us globally are more and more conscious of we have to do something about this one Earth that's ours. There's only one, as far as I know, and I'm not hoping that NASA or anybody else is going to find a place where we can live within the next 20, 40 years. So I'm thinking that we have to work on all of that, but we can work smartly so that we can reduce the l'empreinte, our global or carbon footprint. We can work together smartly and reduce that so that my grandchild can enjoy life further down the road. But at the same time, there's also an economical purpose to that. I mean, working smart financially makes my situation better, which means I can pay my employees better, I can pay my authors better, I can, so there's a whole bunch of reasons other than economics, but economics is clearly also a good reason to think smartly about environment.
And I think you've found creative ways to make it economically viable as well, and a lot of the sustainability issues we're hearing about drives up the cost of printing, as I'm sure Diego will be telling us, but you found ways to make it economical whilst being sustainable at the same time.
Yeah, and I think the fact that I try and work as much as possible in a collaborative way with others, I think that is a good way to find solutions. And again, Our purpose is to try and reduce our carbon footprint, be more efficient. But I don't think we talk about sustainability, durability. If I know that publishers around the world are falling apart because of environmental issues or financial issues or the access to paper issue, that's not helping me. That means there's one less publisher around the world who might buy my books to print for their kids. And so it's a loss for me. So we need to make sure that we work collectively. And for me, that concept of collaboration shouldn't be just locally in my province or in Europe. It should be worldwide, How can we manage to support that and make sure that we have the best efficient way of getting the books out to the children?
Do you think that being an environmentally friendly publisher makes you more attractive to your authors, to your illustrators, to your customers?
No. Well, a few maybe, We have in Quebec, and you probably have the same thing, we have some people who look and they say, oh, you printed it in China, right? And as they're saying that, they're looking at their iPhone, right? Or their watch, or they're tying their belt, and nobody's told them, or they were going to watch their TV screen, and that's all made in China. And so they get really sensitive about that. But generally speaking, nobody's ever asked me if I was, environmentally conscious or sensitive. We do it because we think it's the right thing to do. And I think eventually it will become a big issue. I'm from the age where there was no recycling. Now it's the only thing we talk about, and we have a whole bunch of books about it. So I think eventually it will become an important question. I don't want to be at the tail. I want to be at the beginning where we're changing things rather than saying, I have to change them.
Yeah, but do you think that it's risen up the agenda because of the pandemic and the long lead times for printing in China and the impact that that's had on your business?
Yeah. Well, I have to say that I see the world as it's turning out, and I worry. I honestly do, and I think we've seen so many things happening in the last little while, and I think the virus is the least of our worries. It will pass. It too will pass. But yeah, it's gone up in the agenda because, as I said, there's only one planet. There's not 17. So we have to do something about that. But I also think that books are an essential part of becoming stronger and more knowledgeable, and mostly children's books. I mean, that's where it happens. Forging our children to be able to think, it comes through books. Music comes through books. Theater comes through books. Movies comes through books. So books are the heartbeat, I think, of that change that we want to drive.
And you mentioned we can't do this alone. It's a supply chain issue. It's not just a publisher's responsibility. So what kind of questions are you asking your suppliers about their sustainable practices?
Good question. And there's a whole bunch of, I can only, I'll just say a few things. For example, packaging, sending boxes, and if you're a bookstore, or if you've asked for, calling in for books, and you get this humongous box, and there's a big plastic bag in it, and then there's 3 books, and you're thinking, why is it this box? Why did you use this humongous box? Why? Because it's cheaper in terms of speed, but it'll cost the planet more. That's a good example. And so there's little examples like that where I find that we're not necessarily being totally efficient, but everybody has to do their little part. Hard for me to tell, and I don't know anything about printing, and I'm not a distributor, and God knows I don't want to be one. So I think everybody has to sit down and sort of think, what can we do together to make things better? And if I'm asked as a publisher to maybe review some of the things that I do to make my printer's life easier or my distributor's life easier, well, I want to listen. I don't want it to be a one-way thing. It has to be both ways, Give me some ideas.
So in an ideal world, what would you like to see from your suppliers? Would you like them to be providing you with more information about their sustainable practices, or providing you with lists of questions and facts that you need to know about sustainability and climate change savings that they're making?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I would like to, I think it would be a good thing. And even though, as I said before, my authors and my bookstores aren't asking me, are you, thinking of sustainability? The fact that I tell them that I am, I think has a positive impact.
Right.
And in the same way, if the printer says, we only use this kind of paper, or we do everything we can to reduce water use, whatever, all those things, it may not impact on certain publishers, but it will certainly impact on some publishers who will say, that's a good reason for me to stick with you, even though you may be a little bit more expensive, because you're thinking about the big picture.
Yeah. And as we said, we didn't predict the pandemic. We didn't predict the geopolitical situation that we're in right now. We haven't predicted the shortage of paper and the increase in fuel and the increase in pricing. I mean, are you taking any steps to future-proof against these kind of events that are becoming more frequent but are still unpredictable?
I come from a country where the pandemic actually had a positive effect. So I was fortunate enough to be in a country where, and there, again, collaboration also includes government structures that understand the importance of reading. And in my country, Canada, and in my province, Quebec, there is that understanding. So when the pandemic came, they didn't say good luck. They said, how can we help? And they gave out money. Some of it we should have gotten, say, in September, but they gave it out in April right away because they knew it might be a tight rope. So that's important. But can we do more? We don't know what the future is like. So the best thing to do is to work on everything as if there was no tomorrow, or this was the last minute of the last hour of this earth, and we need to do everything we can to keep that minute going.
Okay, we will come back to you. But for now, I'm going to move on to Diego. Thank you. So Diego, you've heard some interesting points there from the publisher's perspective. As a printer and a company that does a lot of printing for the publishing industry, where are you in your journey for improving sustainability and contributing to the climate change goals?
As a company, we start working on sustainability years ago, and we were really pushed by a customer. We used to supply IKEA, and IKEA was really demanding for sustainability.
Right.
And they forced us, they helped us to understand in a better way what we should do for sustainability, and they teach us how to do it. So we start 10 years ago, and we start with a kind of social sustainability. We start to have all the workers employed by us. We don't buy any work outside, and from that point we start also to look at the environmental certification that we need, and we have to do more, but we are on the right way.
Give us a couple of examples of what you've done.
We have a lot of certification. We are buying only FSC paper, so our customers are getting book with paper certification. And we also decide to have all the production chain in every single factory that we have. So this avoid the traveling
Yes.
of the goods, the half-finished goods from one city to another city and back. So we are doing everything in our own factory.
Right.
This is the first start. It's always difficult for us when we are talking about reducing quantity, because we need quantities to survive. But we can, if we work together with the publisher, we can have a much better control on production, and we can have more titles. So the quantities will be the same, but split it in more titles.
And what else do you think you need to do? What comes next? I mean, people are talking a lot about things like water waste and the carbon emissions because of traveling by truck, for example.
We are working in transport and in getting better condition, and we are talking to the publisher in different areas that we can maybe deliver in the same truck more goods. We are asking the publisher to talk together and to have this ordering together and to combine them to save transport.
Yeah, so you're having the same conversations that Simon's having with his publishing colleagues. You're facilitating some of those conversations.
Is a big part. Big part should be done by the publisher, in my opinion, because we as a printer, we can do everything in a perfect way with all certification possible. We improve our sustainability with, for instance, we are buying only energy from renewable font, and this make us not cheap.
Right.
So we need also this help from the publisher that they should accept a little bit higher costs.
Yeah. And are you working with your suppliers like paper manufacturers, glue, ink, etc.? What demands are you making of them?
Today is very difficult to work with paper mills because of the shortage of paper, and I think that this particular situation is not helping in this period.
Yeah.
It is not helping because we are forced to say yes to everything. Paper mills are doing what they like, and in this moment we cannot talk about different way of supplying or optimization about the transport. We have to accept everything, and because we need to produce books. And it's a little bit the same for publishing.
Yeah.
We cannot say anything to the paper mill. With ink, we work a lot, and now inks are much less. We have a less problem with ink.
And so, Simon, I'm just going to come back to you very, very quickly. So, hearing that from Diego, that the steps they're taking does make them more sustainable, but it does push up the cost a little bit. What's your reaction to that?
So the counter reaction is saying, okay, so how can we increase the print run and reduce his costs so that in the end we're all saving money? And he has, and I totally agree with what he's saying about the fact that the mills are holding us all hostage in their strategy. And let's go back to the whole concept of global, because what the mills are doing right now is cardboard for your Amazons and your Aladdin and all of those deliveries. And I know during the pandemic it just went crazy. I don't know about you, but on my street, every 20 minutes there was somebody receiving a box on my street, not on my business. Lunch and this and that, and that's a lot of cardboard that's going, paper not being turned into paper, but turned into cardboard. And mills are happy because they're making money, and it's cheap to make, and it's happy there. So what we need to do is going back to that concept of governments saying paper is important because we need books for kids, we need books because it's part of our culture, and we got to be able to tell mills, you can't just think about your own business and Amazon's business.
I agree.
That's difficult. But in the meantime,
none of this is easy.
But in the meantime, I think that we have to be sensitive, and that was the other thing I was going to say. We tend to get very upset very quickly, but I think patience and understanding that the other is also caught in a situation that might be complicated. And I said earlier, I don't want to be I don't want to be a printer. I don't want to be a bookstore because it's complicated. I don't know anything about it. And I understand that if it's complicated for me in my own job, it can be also complicated in his job. And I have to be sensitive, and we need to talk. Talking is a very nice thing. You can learn to talk also by reading books. Books. There we go, talking about books again.
So you've heard about Simon's drivers for change, but what are you hearing from other publishers, Diego? What's their imperative and what demands are they making of you?
This shortage of paper, yeah, shortage of paper. The publisher had some publisher had a very strange approach to that, and they increased the quantity instead of reducing the quantity.
I've heard that.
Because they are so worried not to get books for their sales, and the impact is also on that many publishers are increasing the quantity in an incredible way, and that they don't need.
Yeah, so we could see a lot more wastage as a result.
Yes, we will have more waste for sure.
Yeah.
And also they avoid for other publishers to have the possibility to print books.
Yeah. It's like the queues at the petrol pumps.
Yes, a little bit.
When we had our gas shortages recently, people that didn't need the gas were still queuing and filling up and preventing people, emergency workers that needed it. So I understand what you're saying. And we talked about the China situation. Are you seeing more requests for publishers?
Yes, more requests from publishers that are moving their production to Europe. They are producing closer to their countries, and this was helpful for us.
Yeah.
But the cost of the transport, the cost of the containers increase in an incredible way. So this help us to be closer to the Chinese price.
Yeah, to try and compete. Yeah.
Yes, trying to compete.
And you have the printing machines and the capability to do the same job as they do, but price was the differentiator.
Yes, we have some books can be produced in Europe, but some other books in Europe nobody is producing anymore, like board books or pop-up books. Are in Europe you cannot find a supplier.
Right. So Ashley, let's move to you. So you're working with HP, which is a major supplier to the print and the publishing industry. And as a company, you take sustainability very seriously as well. But when it comes to the publishing industry, what contributions are you trying to make, or you are making, to improving sustainability in our sector?
So it's very true that HP as a corporation has sustainability as a primary goal. So we're able to look at, top to bottom, where are we impacting? Talking about ink, so the inkjet machines, it's water-based ink. Yeah. So that's one step, is the materials that you use when you create the materials that you use, are they sustainable? Recycling of the plastic ink cartridges. If you have an HP laptop or an HP desktop printer, there are a lot of consumer programs that will enable you to recycle your machines, which HP then cleans and then donates, or recycling programs for your printer cartridges on your desktop printer. Well, those printer cartridges look a whole lot like the ones that you're replacing. So there are recycling programs for our customers who are suppliers as well. So it's how we make our equipment, how we then the resources that we source to make it, and then thinking about how it's used by our customers and enabling them to make better choices and making it easy. When you're a global company with the kind of reach that HP has, it's incumbent upon us to take advantage of our size and be able to, we can do things at scale that others can't. So it's our responsibility to use that responsibly, so that Diego can meet the demands of an IKEA and be confident in the equipment that he's using is in line with his goals and his customers' goals.
Right. And you've been in the publishing sector for a while.
Forever.
I mean, particularly over the last 5 years, what changes have you seen?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So this is so amazing. With my colleagues who are mostly HP hardware world people, and I've been just preaching to them, I've never seen this before. You know, in 25 years of working with publishers and helping them to accept new technology and drive new strategies, there are elements to this that are completely unprecedented. So one of the first ones, of course, is that publishers, particularly really big ones, that have a little more leverage, if they wanted something printed, it got printed. If they wanted it on this paper, it came on that paper. And they had the ability, it was just infinite, right? If you wanted a book, you got a book. And for the first time ever, that's not true. You can't necessarily get the paper you want. You can't get that book in a week. You are, I don't want to say at the mercy of, because I think that sounds pejorative, but as a publisher, particularly large publishers, you have to suddenly be a little more cooperative and a little more understanding in the challenges that others are facing. And so they begin to think about things like, okay, maybe I don't need 40 different types of paper. Maybe I can live with 10, which then leads back to the paper mills. And you're absolutely right that paper mills are shifting to print much more corrugated to make boxes for everybody who's having things shipped instead of, shopping locally. But so they're turning off whole lines that used to make book paper. They're shutting them down. But then again, they've been asked to make so many different types of paper that there's not a tremendous demand for each one of those types. There's a ton of demand for book paper, but not necessarily every type of book paper. So then and we're in a position at HP to pull all of these constituencies together. So I hear what you're saying, and yes, you do feel like you're at the mercy of the paper mills. Well, the paper mills feel like they're at the mercy of economics, and they simply, we can't ask them to lose money. They don't necessarily have to, do it to their advantage and the disadvantage of all their customers. But there's got to be an understanding, as you said, that everybody is facing challenges that they've never had to deal with before.
Yeah.
And we got to fix it together.
We've got to work together, and we've got to talk, and we've got to be open and have these conversations.
Yeah.
I mean, you're listening to what's going on in the publishing sector and talking to publishers. What do you want to hear? What questions are you asking of publishers to help you to be able to influence change as a company?
So yesterday morning, we hosted a breakfast for about 10 publishers from different countries. And it's really easy because you can ask one question and then they start going, and you can just sit and listen. And afterward, some of them expressed a real thanks that happened, because they thought they were the only ones facing some of these challenges. And then when every single publisher at the table said, oh my gosh, I'm dealing with that too, and then it becomes, well, what are you doing about it? So you both find kindred spirits who are challenged by the same things, but then you begin to learn from each other. And some of these solutions will only work if all of us do it. If we all change. If one publisher, takes it on the chin and reduces their request to 5 different paper types, but everybody else keeps doing the same thing, well, it has no benefit. So understanding from publishers what their challenges truly are, what is keeping you up at night, has always been my standard question when I would start working with a new company. So that when we have conversations with paper mills or our customers who buy our big hardware, we can begin to translate and convey, okay, well, I hear what you're saying, but let me tell you what's going on the other end. And what we would love to do is just convene more of these gatherings and just sit back and listen, and then find ways to help solutions happen.
And what obstacles are you hearing to these changes that need to happen?
Oh, how
Money.
about cost?
Money?
Cost and cost and cost. When an industry has been essentially invested in its entirety around unit cost, and your P&Ls are based on unit cost, and your compensations are based on unit cost, it's incredibly hard to start thinking about fully landed costs of a book. It requires changes at so many different levels, from the way it works in your head, to the way it works in your accounting system, to the way it works in a sales staff meeting. So we have to find a way to look at things differently. And what a couple of publishers that are looking for different solutions have said is that, again, for the first time ever, they are able to measure an opportunity cost. Because I've been doing digital printing since 1998, and at the very beginning it was, but think about all those lost sales when you don't have the book, when it's not in the store. And the standard response for until 2 years ago was, well, they'll buy something else. And I can't measure that. So I know that it's probably out there, but I have no idea how big it is. Well, now when your entire print run goes over the side of the ship, and you were supposed to have a cookbook that goes live in June with your really high profile chef author, and you have no books, you know exactly what you lost. You know how much you lost in sales, you know your credibility, you know your relationship with your really important author, your hit that Amazon gave you because you didn't make your delivery. So you, as a publisher, can now add up what you're losing when you don't have a book. So if I'm going to look for the cheapest price, that's, say it's 50 cents a book. And for whatever reason, whether it's paper or I walk away from the price or the shipping, I didn't save 50 cents. I lost $5. And I've never heard, in trying to extol the virtues of targeted print runs and quick turns and do five times instead of 25,000 in China and all the benefits, printing in country. So it only goes on a truck and not a ship. All these things have always been true about digital production. But I was like pushing a rock up a hill. Whereas now they're coming to me saying, I can't lose that $5. I might pay 65 cents instead of 50 because that's better than losing that $5. So publishers are beginning to look at the opportunity cost and the total landed cost, like what it costs to ship. So earlier, one of the publishers we were talking to, a container used to cost $2,000 and now it's $6,000. And it will probably be $10,000 in 2 months.
Wow.
So things that used to be cheap and infinite are expensive and limited. And it is forcing people to look at, frankly, solutions that have always been here, or all of my adult life, as something more viable.
Yeah. I mean, we work in a global industry. Diego, in particular, are you seeing differences geographically with publishers that you work with, suppliers that you work with, or are we in a universal situation here? And, when it's...
No, I'm working with different publishers all over the world, and the problem is the same everywhere.
It's the same.
I agree with Ashley, and I hope that the publisher understand that it's better for them not to lose €5 and pay 10 cents more the book.
Yeah. And the problem is universal, but are the reactions the same? Or are you seeing different reactions? So if the price is more, are some more willing to accept it than others?
The reaction is the same. When you increase the prices, the reaction is all over the world the same. They are upset.
I mean, in a way, what you're saying is quite heartening, because if it's the same problem that everyone's facing, it's the same solutions that everyone can achieve, then we can and should be working as a global industry. Ashley, are you finding the same?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's definitely cost. It's that focus on unit cost is still there, even when intellectually the publisher will know it needs to change. Deep in your heart and soul, it's unit cost.
Yeah.
So I think it then, and that's legit, right? That's the way we've always done it, and it still has validity. But it's then incumbent upon those of us who are part of that supply chain to find ways to help publishers and printers be more efficient, do more with less, so that if the cost is going up one way, we can find a way to save it on another side so that you guys can stay in business. Yeah, I mean, people aren't raising prices out of, animosity.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So where can we find ways to make some pieces of this cheaper?
Want to come in on that, Simon?
Yeah, well, I totally agree, and I think it's a question of balance. Right? There's a question of looking at your cost and how much you can lose. It's not a question of one or the other, but you have to think about both. But I would say that the unfortunate thing sometimes, and not all, but some multinationals, is the fact that there's a target line that is expected for the shareholders, and that can drive bad decisions that are only driven for that reason.
Yeah, I don't disagree about it. If you're publicly traded,
but I'm not saying that everybody's different. Yeah, we need to be able to have a reflection that encompasses everybody's desire to not see the structure die, because if most of the publishers can't survive, then printers aren't really necessary anymore, and then paper isn't really, so everybody loses. So it's a balance. It's like ecology. I mean, whole balance in nature is based on everything being set in place, but communication is the key, and that's first.
So speaking of communication, I mean, you work with publishers all over the world. Are you having these conversations with publishers around the world?
Yeah, and I always feel a little shameful about where I come from, because I'm so fortunate. And my biggest hassle in my brain, what keeps me up at night, is how can I be involved in a global solution so that so that Mohammed Sahad from Nur al-Makhif doesn't have to close down his shop in Egypt because of what's going on in the world? And how can I make sure that the small French-speaking publisher in Mali isn't struck down by the large French structures that are going to come in and say, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it? That's not, for me, an environmentally safe situation. And if printers and paper mills can work together to sort of say, okay, the business isn't just about making more money, but making sure that everybody in the structure, no matter where in the world, can get good books for the kids and their parents and the adults and the teachers and the professors. Wouldn't that be just way better? And I think we'd all make more money in the end, really.
Yeah. So what can we do about this so that Simon gets some sleep at night? What are the solutions? Is it more talking, more openness, more transparency, more collaboration?
More talking together between supplier and publisher and producer.
Yeah.
And this can help.
And coming up with joint solutions, not solutions in our verticals.
So last night at dinner, sitting next to publishers, and thank you, dinner was beautiful and lovely and delicious if you're not Italian. I was discussing with a couple of people from a publishing company the benefits of distributed digital printing, right? And it's even better if all of your digital printers are using the same hardware and technology, because then the books will all look the same in whatever continent you're printing, right? And so she's the production manager and started talking to me about how difficult it is to manage print runs at 5 different places at the same time.
Right.
So just listening to her and what her day would be like, I think of this as an amazing solution that ought to be applicable in multiple ways. And I had never realized, well, hang on a second, if I'm working with 5 different suppliers and all of the paperwork and everything becomes now 5 times and how much longer it takes and who else I have to, it's really complicated. So having multiple, not just publishers speaking, which is also great, but having different parts of the process, talking and listening, most important, listening to each other and having empathy for what they go through. So now when I talk about, you can do this in 5 different countries all at the same time, I will think of it and talk about it differently, because I'll understand what that person across the table from me is thinking, oh God, no, and why. So then I have to think about, okay, well, what can we do? Because we work with all of these different companies, what could we do that would make that easier? Yeah. And so each of us then, you share, you listen, and then, okay, now what? Now I got to go do something.
Yeah, yeah. And the solution will come.
It will come.
Yeah. Okay, Simon.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the other end of the chain. I mean, we've been talking about like the books being created, then they get into bookstores, and that's another part of the sustainability that we don't talk about really, but the turnaround. I mean, books are put in a bookstore, and I don't know about you, but in my, again, in my province, very fortunate. Bookstores believe in our books, and they keep them on the shelf for a long time, and they try and sell our books. Not sure that's true in every other country, where if your book is on the cube or on the shelf and it's not selling within a few weeks, it's dead. And then it goes back to the back end, and then it won't sell. So it'll end up in the box, another cardboard box, and it'll go back to the distributor. And that's a lot of wasted money and gas. And then it goes where? To the pulp. So we can make toilet paper with it. And that's shameful. And so I think that we need to talk about that part of the book chain as well. How maybe we need to maybe we need to make less books. There are publishers who pride themselves, we do 3,000 books a year. And you're thinking, do you have to do 3,000 books a year? Is that really necessary? I mean, you know, I have 14 books about cars.
Yeah.
Great.
And then if you have fewer books, you can spend more marketing money on them and sell more units of those particular books. Exactly. I'm going to ask the audience if anyone has any comments or questions on what you've heard so far.
Thank you, everyone. One of the things that, so I noticed that you've been talking a lot about costs increasing, and I totally accept that it's unavoidable, but nobody has really talked about prices, like end user prices increasing. And anytime I talk to bookshops, we get told, oh, you know, we couldn't possibly support any higher prices than they already are, but there's only so many ways to slice the pie. And that's why everyone is so focused on unit costs, because you need to have some money at the end. So I was just wondering if that's something you might like to talk a little bit about, and what kind of response that you guys are getting from bookshops and readers about the possibility of increasing end prices.
Ashley, did you want to go first?
Well, it was something that happened this morning that I was hoping would come up. Again, having a conversation with a publisher, talking a lot about price, and the end consumer price is really important. And certainly it's important because you can price yourself out of a market. But for this publisher in particular, who publishes educational materials for children, and often children in environments where there's not a lot of money, period, you can't go over a certain price, because then the children won't get the books. It's not just the parent won't pay it, it's that the book won't happen for that child. And so one of the things that's fascinating in what I'm doing now is I see all the different uses of printing, right? The boxes and the direct mail and all of that's important. But there is something about what we do. It's a service. It's a calling. You know, nobody really goes into publishing to get rich. You do it because you believe in what you're doing. And that is permeated through, like, I was amazed. I went to a book manufacturer's annual meeting, their trade show, and they all get teary talking about the books they've made and the children, and like the people making the books are as invested as we are in creating the books. I have a little publishing company, very little. So I think part of it, absolutely, we have to figure out the economic solutions. But the other part for me, and coming from the outside and inside and talking to all these different folks, is helping them to understand this is not just about profit. This isn't it, and it's not even just about survival, because it sort of feels like we have an existential threat to us and our industry at the moment. This is part of our mission. And to help the Diegos of the world and the HPs of the world buy into that mission, I think is incumbent upon all of us to give them a motivation and an understanding and an empathy, you know, not just to keep the customer, but because what we do really matters.
Simon, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I don't know about, you know, the final price. I know that there's that, but I've always done it instinctively, and I can tell you that in my business, I've increased the price over the last 5-7 years. And you're right, there is that level of tolerance. And here we're in children's publishing, and I used to be in educational publishing. Strange thing about educational publishing is you could have a 500-page book. They look exactly the same number of photos and Photoshops and all of the exactly. One is medicine and the other one is literature. One goes for $49.95, the other one goes for $340. Why? It's the same print run, same. What happened? So there's something in the brain of people, and I don't think I'm going to try and change the mindset of every human being to try and convince them that it's worth paying $42 for a book so that the authors can be paid and have, you know, food on their table, and that the printer can survive, and I can't do that. So you're right, there's that margin, and I gotta make sure. And publishers, even though, you know, people always think we make the most money, actually there isn't that much left when you pay the printer and the authors and the illustrators and everybody else and the library and the bookstores. But it works if you work intelligently and you look for strategies like printing collectively and all that, then you can stick to that price. You may not make the profits you wanted to make. You may not hit 20% or 17%. You may only hit 3%, but maybe that's okay. Maybe 3 is okay if it's to say the kids are going to be reading and we're increasing the opportunity for children to be there. I want butter on my bread, gluten-free bread, by the way, but I want butter on my bread, but I also want to make sure that kids get their books.
Question over here.
Hi, thank you very much for this nice discussion. I'm Pedro Solomé, co-owner of a small publisher company in Portugal. If you allow me, I have a small comment and then a question. The comment is that I think we've come a really long way in sustainability in the publishing industry. When I grew up in the 80s, paper was literally the devil. No one liked paper. You want everything made of plastic. There are several reasons for this. You know, people still had the mercury in their heads in the waterbeds from the paper mills. Ink still had selenium, all these kind of things, and forests were still not certified. A lot of reasons that I think we improved, and this is something we should mention. But going now into my question is, with the exception of the IKEA example that we heard, all of the other improvements that we've done in sustainability were actually economical improvements, rather than, they were not driven by sustainability purposes. And my question is, in other areas, what we are seeing is that this sustainability has been driven by legislation. For instance, in Europe, if you buy a piece of clothing, you actually have a life cycle assessment behind it that proves that that you're not polluting the waterways and all these kind of things. And we're starting to see consumer electronics, for instance, to inform the consumer what is the best sustainable product, you know, with how much energy it uses and these kind of things. I'm wondering if you are, since you are more in the higher in the market chain, in the value chain, I mean, if you're seeing something that from that if there are any forces, legislative forces that you predict that in the next years will bring some changes into the field.
I don't know about legislation necessarily, but I think
But it's a good idea.
But campaigning is increasing, I would say, particularly from the younger generation. And the voice of the youth activist, I think, is going to put a lot of pressure on suppliers, manufacturers, consumers to be more environmentally friendly. That may lead to legislation. Who knows what's down the line on that front? But I think for the time being and for the very near future, I think peer pressure, youth activism in particular, is going to bring some of that impact.
Well, I think legislations usually come because there's a lot of pressure, electoral pressure, and I think if like our publishing association has created this question of, you know, sustainability, and we have a committee, and if the bookstores and if the population starts talking about it, and I must say that I look to Europe and some of the laws that have been put in that we don't have in Canada, and I sometimes sort of cringe at the idea that we haven't even gone there yet. And it's a very good idea that we should look into. Can we integrate into the legislation an ability to create content without it, you know, just being economics?
Just two quick things. You're absolutely right that environmental changes have been driven by commercial imperatives. But then if you look, there's a philosophy, you know, of do well by doing good. When you do the right thing in a smart way, you can be more successful as a company. And in working with some of the largest publishers who are instigating sustainability initiatives and trying to help them figure out what that means and how we can support, now I say, why are you doing this? Because in most cases, there is not a customer, there's not a reader saying, I want my sustainable book. The reason they're doing it is because of their employees. It is so difficult to retain talent. And when you have an engaged, educated, young employee base, and they want it, and they want to be part of a company that has responsibility, that company figures out how to be responsible. So it's really interesting that when I was doing some roundtables with a lot of sustainability directors from big and small publishers, the commonality was, well, this is what our people want. We're not really sure that our customers care, but those of us who get up and go to work every day here, we care. And we want to be part of a company we can be proud of. So it may be legislation. Of course, I come from a place where that is so not going to happen. And it may be activism, but it is working where I live because of personal responsibility and speaking out and saying this is important to me. And you find out it's important to the other 5 people in your cube space. And then the company starts to listen because they don't want to lose you.
I think we've come to the end of our journey for today. I think it's a subject we can talk about for a very long time, and I hope that we do have this conversation, and I'm sure we will over the coming months and the coming years. But please join me in thanking our panelists today.
And can I just encourage you, if this is helpful, or if some other variation of this is helpful, if you need more of this, tell people, tell us, tell other publishers, tell organizers, so that we know to keep doing this. If you find this valuable, then say so we can make sure that a company like HP who can make these things happen, that's where we put our resources. So that Diego knows it's worth his time to come here and to come from Quebec, and that we all learn more. So if we're gonna do this, and I agree, collaboration is incredibly important, we've got to say that it's important and show people so that this happens again.
Thank you, everyone.